Hi, welcome to Underground Catholicism. I am Elijah Yassi. I have the pleasure of having Allan Ruhl back again. I don't know how it's been, like the fifth consecutive time or so. I lost track, but it's a pleasure always having you on. How you doing, Al?
I'm doing well. It looks like the lockdowns in my city are going to loosen up. They're still strict, but it looks like the end is in sight, and I couldn't be happier.
Sweet, sweet, awesome. That's good to hear. Same thing is happening here, so thank God for that. We're going back to normal lives here little by little, so that's good. That's good. So today we have a special show for y'all, and it's going to be one of those shows where I sit at Alan's feet and he teaches about a topic in history. This time it's as you know from the title, the fall of Constantinople, which he says is the most evil time in the history of humanity. So
Well,
I'm exaggerating it a little bit, but it is one of the most
it's
evil.
bad. It's bad.
Really bad, right? Yeah. So I'm excited to hear about it, and I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic on to Al. Al, take it over.
Yeah, and I just want to explain why it's bad. It's not just like for example, there was a Christian city in back in the day called Antioch. It was one of the early patriarchates and one of the largest Christian cities. It gets taken over by Muslim Arabs, and then eventually the Byzantines take it back in the 900s, and the Turks take it, then the Crusaders take it, then the Mamluks take it, and the Mamluks, when they took it in 1268, they slaughtered literally everyone in the city, at least all the Christians, but most of the people were Christian. Very ugly event. Like, they got into the city, the Mamluks under Baibars closed the door of the gates of the city and got to work, And the city never recovered after that. And so it became kind of dilapidated. And if you go to Turkey today, at the place where it used to be, it's a bunch of ruins. Is that sad? Yes, it is. But the fact that a glorious Christian city, the capital of a Christian empire, becomes the capital of a Muslim empire, and not only Muslim empire, one that is a Muslim empire that's terrorizing Christians in the Balkans and in Greece and in Anatolia, and also beyond for centuries. So it's so like that's why it's a tragedy, as opposed to something like what happened to Antioch, which is also a tragedy. But all right, let's get started. Now, by the year about 400 AD, the Roman Empire was mostly Christian at this point. And its capital had moved from Rome, as in Rome in Italy, to Constantinople. Now, Constantinople, official name was New Rome. And it just became known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Constantine Polis. Polis is city in Greek. Like, that's where you get the word metropolis from, or something like that. Okay, and then eventually you get something called the Theodosian walls. Back in the day, all major cities had walls around them for protection. And Constantinople had this very impressive set of walls. And they're called the Theodosian land walls. And they were massive. No other walls in the ancient world ever came close to this. And these walls allowed it to survive several sacks. Now, of course, in the 630s, the Muslims invade out of Arabia. They start conquering Christian lands, North Africa, the Holy Land. They siege Constantinople. They raid Constantinople a few times in the 600s. Small raids, unsuccessful. Now, in 717 to 718, the Muslim Arabs under I can't remember the caliph's name. It was not Abdul Malik. It was after him. I think the guy after Al Walid. Anyway, I'm not sure, but the point is, in 717, the Muslims do a huge assault on Constantinople. It's it's both land and sea, and it lasted 13 months. Huge. There were more soldiers there. Like it was like 120,000 soldiers, and eventually the Muslims gave up because they couldn't siege it. And they withdrew on August 15th, which, as you know, is the Feast of the Assumption. And so the Christians in Constantinople always thought the Virgin Mary protected their city. So it remains a Greek city until, and then in 1071, you have the Turks come into Anatolia, Battle of Manzikert. We talked about this on one of our previous videos. Crusades are called in 1095. The Crusades are a temporary blow to the Turks in Anatolia, and but now, of course, during the Crusades, the Latins take control of Constantinople from 1204 to 1261, when a successor state, a Byzantine successor state in Anatolia, takes it back, and that really bankrupted the city financially. Like when the Crusaders take the city, they never did like a mass massacre. A few people were killed, but overall it was loot, right? So in 1291, the Crusader states fall, and at this point, it's around this point that the Sultanate of Rum, the Turkish state in Anatolia, falls apart. And you have a whole bunch of autonomous Turkish states. And one of them is run by a guy named Osman. That's where we get the word Ottoman from. And so he starts an Ottoman state. It's only like a tiny speck on a map. And there's a whole bunch of emirs all over Anatolia. But his state keeps expanding. And then it slowly swallows up more Greek states. Now, from 1341 to 1347, there's a civil war in the Byzantine Empire. And things are heating up in the Balkans. And to stop this, the Byzantines, it was John Cantacuzene, who was a claimant to the throne of Constantinople. He brings Turkish soldiers into Europe as mercenaries. And this is the first time that the Turks are in Europe. So now the Turks are mercenaries, and they help restore him to the throne. But the problem is they stayed there. And in fact, if you remember in 2006 or 7, I can't remember, Pope Benedict quoted that Byzantine Empire about, it's like, show me something that Mohammed brought that... He's essentially talking about this, because Manuel II, that emperor Pope Benedict quoted, he eventually becomes emperor in the 1390s. So, and in this time, basically the Turks and the Greeks, aka the Romans and Byzantines, are fighting over the Balkans. They're fighting over Greece, and eventually the Turks take most of Greece. And then in 1391, or in 1390, around 1390, give or take a few years, the Turks implement something called the Devshirme. And that is a tax on the Christians. It's not like the jizya, where you just pay a certain amount of your money. It's a tax where you actually have to give your children to the Ottoman Empire. They would come and inspect towns and take the stronger children, and they would take them from their parents. A horrible thing. And now I know some Turkish apologists out there said there were some parents who begged them to take their kid. Well, first of all, that's a terrible parent. And second of all, yes, there are cases of that, because if they did take your kid and your kid became a soldier or a janissary, they treated that family well. So there were some advantages, but still it was pure evil. And so these people were trained as janissaries. They were the elite infantry unit of the Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years. In fact, until 1830, then they finally suppressed the janissaries. But they would play a role in the fall of Constantinople. Okay, so in 1391, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and Serbia are both vassals of the Ottomans. They pay a tribute every year, and they have to do military operations. Now, in 1392, keep in mind, at this point, the empire is not that big. You've got Constantinople, the islands, the area around Constantinople, some ports in Thrace, the Peloponnese, and a few other parts of Greece. They don't have anything in Anatolia anymore. So in 1392, a Russian church, which is, as you know, an Orthodox church, same as Constantinople, stops commemorating the Roman emperor in their liturgy. So they had just lost respect for the empire. They said he was a nobody. And then it's around this time, I think around this time, between now and Florence, the idea of Third Rome starts getting thrown around. And that was Moscow, obviously. All right. So in 1393, or in 1390, I can't remember the years. In 1392, the Sultan, I think it's Bayezid I, invites Manuel II and the leader of Serbia, because he's also a vassal, to come to Adrianople to meet with the Sultan. And of course, since they're vassals, they have no choice. So they go there. And this Sultan was a bit unstable. I'm pretty sure it's Bayezid I. I'm pretty sure it's Bayezid I. But the Sultan's a bit unstable. He wants to, his plan was to assassinate them both. But he changes his mind before they arrive. So they arrive, and they basically announce to them, it's like, so the plan was to assassinate you guys, but we changed our mind. So here's some nice gifts. You can go back home. Of course, these people are just horrified. The Roman Empire and the Serbian leader are like, whoa, you know. So they each go back to their own cities. And a year later, they're summoned again. And what do you think they're going to do? They're not going to, the Manuel's not going to go because he almost got assassinated last time. So that's not going to happen again. Then Bayezid, again, I'm pretty sure it's Bayezid. This is really bothering me. At that time, he gets furious and does an 8-year blockade of Constantinople that lasts from 1394 to 1402. An 8-year blockade. Partial siege blockade, just trying to starve it out because he's like, I want to get rid of this state once and for all. There was a crusade at this time, the Crusade of Nicopolis, which was crushed. It was a large crusade, but it was crushed nevertheless. And then, then at this time, Manuel flees to Europe. His city's blockaded, but he manages to escape and goes to Europe to fundraise. He's like on a fundraising tour of Europe. Keep in mind, this is during the Renaissance. So like antiquity is getting popular. And the fact that they have a Roman emperor there, they're like, wow, we've got the Roman emperor here. He doesn't have much of an empire. So they were pretty impressed with him. So he starts in Italy. He went to Rome. He presumably met with the Pope because, I don't know, if you're a figure like that, you're probably going to meet with the Pope. He met with as much people as he could. He goes to France, goes to England, and then he goes back to France. He stays there like a year. And so he's like on this big tour of Europe. He was like a celebrity doing a tour. Then he goes all the way back to things changed, because as bad as things were for Constantinople with this constant siege, a new player comes on um, the map. A group of Mongol Turks led by Tamerlane comes into Anatolia. This guy was just a ruthless conqueror. It was just conquering for the sake of conquering. Like he'd go to a nation. He's like, you can become my slaves or I'll kill you all. Like that's the kind of option this guy gave. He was pretty ruthless. So he invades Anatolia and of course smashes the Ottoman Empire. And of course the Ottomans have to lift the siege of Constantinople. Now at this point is what's known from 1402 for the next 10 or 15 years. It's what's known as the Ottoman Interregnum. So it's basically a civil war. You had tons of claimants to the throne, and one would get in, his cousin would kill them, then his brother would kill him, and this guy would, like, it was essentially Game of Thrones Ottoman style, you know. And so eventually there's actually this one guy named Suleiman who was actually very favorable to the Romans. He lifted their tribute status, and then he gave them back all their stuff in Greece, and he had some holdings in the Balkans, but he's like, I'll only hold it as a vassal to you. And so in other words, he had to pay the Romans. So this was pretty good. This Suleiman guy, I like this guy. I hope he converted so he's in heaven. However, during this whole Game of Thrones thing, he was killed by someone and they took over. So that was the end of him, and things went back to how they were. So then eventually, fast forward to the 1420s, there's still an Ottoman civil war going on. And the Romans, they back one of the people. And the person they backed didn't win. And the guy who won was a guy named Murad II. And he was mad at the Byzantines for backing the his rival. So in 1422, a huge siege of Constantinople is underway. Huge siege. In fact, this may have been the largest siege against Constantinople. They had everything there. They had siege towers. And this siege lasted about 3 months. They had a naval blockade, and they came close to taking the city. They had a prophet in their army, a self-proclaimed prophet who claimed to be a descendant of Muhammad. And he's like, I will tell you when and where to attack and what hour and all this stuff. And it failed. Like, he told them when and what time to attack, but it failed. So, and then eventually they just withdraw. This is 1422. Now, in 1425, Manuel dies and is succeeded by one of his sons, John VIII. And in 1430, Murad takes Thessalonica, which is at that time the second largest city in the Byzantine Empire. And at this point, John basically says, I need support from the West. So he collaborates with Pope Eugene IV, and this is what we call the Council of Florence. So the Council of Florence, basically a whole bunch of Greek bishops go to Ferrara, then Florence, and they talk about reunion. They talk about the four major things. They talk about the Pope, obviously, the filioque, the azymes, the kind of bread used in the liturgy, and purgatory. And that was the four things that they discussed. And the Greeks, although there were a few true believers in union, Metropolitan Bessarion and and Isidore of Kiev, they were won over and they signed, and maybe one or two other true believers in the Union Antry side. The rest of the people didn't believe in the Union, but essentially signed this as a favor for the emperor. And then, of course, you have the famous holdout Mark of Ephesus, who refuses to sign the Union. So they've got a union now. The Catholics and Eastern Orthodox are back together. And then eventually this union, as soon as the Greeks go home, they repudiate the union wholesale. The Russians repudiate it. The patriarchs repudiate it. The only place it had any traction was Constantinople, and that's because it was being enforced by the emperor. And because keep in mind, at this point, there's a chance that military support could still save the city. So John the Eighth was he's enforcing it. Like, for example, at this point in a place like Antioch or Jerusalem, there's no benefit to it. The patriarchs there see no benefit because there's no crusade that's going to come help them. But in Constantinople, there's at least a reason to keep the union going. So they keep the union going, and eventually Pope Eugene IV calls a crusade. This is known as the Crusade of Varna. It was mainly Poles and Wallachians. They marched into Ottoman territory and met the Ottomans at Varna, which is in modern-day Bulgaria. And this crusade was absolutely crushed. So it's kind of like, oh. Now, in 1448, John VIII dies, and Constantine the 11th, who's the brother of John VIII, also a son of Manuel II, becomes emperor. And Sultan Mehmet, the son of Murad dies in 1451, and Mehmet becomes the Sultan in 1451. Now, immediately, what the Sultan did is met with the Byzantines and signed a peace treaty. He signed a peace treaty with them. Oh, yeah, peace treaty. So, like, this guy was a weird guy, the Sultan. He seemed to have multiple personalities, too. It's like that, the bad guy in that M. Night Shyamalan movie. I can't remember. But a very weird guy. Very the kind of guy who'd be interesting to me, and very superstitious as well. He had tons of astrologers in his court. He like consulted them before he attacked cities, and he was a very weird character. So in 1452, the Constantinople is suspicious that he's about to break, because according to this one source, where's my source? According to this source here, History of Mehmet the Conqueror by Kretavoulos, who is he was Greek, but he was a Greek in his court, so this is a very favorable biography. He basically says as soon as he signs a peace treaty, he starts planning the attack. Now, in 1452, he builds a giant fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, and it basically 4 ships. It had cannons, and it basically was a toll thingy. The ships had to pay tribute. Constantine complained about this, but he couldn't do anything about that. And Mehmet said it was not a violation of their treaty. So they couldn't really do anything about it. This fortress was called Rumeli, and in Turkish, it translates as throat slitter. Charming, huh? Now, at this point, Pope Nicholas V, that's the Pope at the time, he's begging everyone in Europe to help Constantinople. He sends out, in fact, we had a question about that famous encyclical he sent to the Portuguese. He's like, Portuguese, just attack the Saracens, do anything you can, because everyone in Europe was too busy. You had the French and the English finishing up the 100 years of war. You had Germany and Poland at war, and everyone seemed to be at war with someone, except the Portuguese. They're like, Portugal, please do anything you can. But they didn't do anything, unfortunately. Now, the Pope sends, keep in mind, a guy named Isidore of Kiev. I'd mentioned him. He had signed the Council of Florence documents. The Pope sends him in late 1452 with 200 archers to help defend the city, because at this time they know Mehmed is going to attack the city. Mehmed also hires a guy named Urban, a Hungarian engineer who had gone to work for the Byzantines, but Constantine couldn't afford to pay him. So he went to work for the Ottomans. This Christian Hungarian. Apparently he got paid handsomely to make all these cannons, including this huge cannon, for the Ottomans. He sold his soul for a bunch of money, and apparently he died. Well, he died during the siege. Actually, a cannon exploded that he had made, and it killed him. That's what they think happened. Now, keep in mind, at this time, one more thing until we get to the attack on Constantinople. There was another claimant to the throne, a cousin of Sultan Mehmed, and he was being held in Constantinople under house arrest. And they knew in Constantinople, if they released him, it would cause a civil war, and the Sultan knew that. And so he wanted to consolidate his claim to the throne. All right, so basically Constantine is sending out letters everywhere for help. The Pope's trying to do what he can. And the call is answered by a Genoese mercenary named Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, who was a mercenary from Genoa. He brought with him 700 mercenaries to defend the city. And Constantine put him in charge of the city's defenses. So he's like securing all the towers, he's training the Roman soldiers. He's telling them how to do the right positioning. Like he's in charge, and he's a soldier. He knows what to do. He's not just a recruit who's gone through 6 weeks of basic training. This guy's a warrior. All right. So in April, now the attack is starting. So, all right. Before I start the attack portion, have you got any questions?
No, you're doing great.
Sweet. Okay. So, so in April of 1453, Mehmed arrives with his entire army, including a naval blockade. He's got 3 portions of the army: European soldiers, soldiers from Anatolia, and the Janissaries. And their goal was to breach the main gate, the gate of St. Romanus. I kind of want to show people something, because it's not going to make sense unless okay. If you don't mind, I'm going to share something on the screen. Okay, you don't mind adding that? Oh. Yeah, so that's how Constantinople looks. There are these land walls over here. And north is a body of water called the Golden Horn. That's like a harbor. And that would where the ships be. But keep in mind, there's a chain. There's a small piece of land, a colony there called Galata. That's a Genoese colony. And there's a chain that goes across. We talked about this in our Fourth Crusade. And that prevents ships from getting over. But the Sultan is going to get his ships into the Golden Horn one way or the other. So, all right. So he's got the three types of troops. He's got his cannons, including his huge cannon, and his Hungarian engineers in charge of firing them. And their goal is to breach the St. Romanus Gate. Now, on the 15th of April, some more ships for the Navy arrive to intensify the blockade. And there's an attack on the land walls, but Justinian and the Emperor managed to repel the attack. And then a bunch of Genoese ships arrive, about 5 or so ships, and they managed to run the blockade and get into the city, get into the harbor, and drop off a whole bunch of supplies for Constantinople. And at this point, Mehmet was furious. He wanted to publicly execute his naval commander, but he decided against it. But he still fired him, though. And then he's like, I'm taking things into my own hands. So he could not get his ships past the chain that was going between Constantinople and Galata. So instead of do what the Crusaders did, take Galata and lower the chain, that would have been smart. He dug a trench and he moved his ships through the trench overland. They used oxen ram fat. So the next morning, the Romans wake up and they see like 70 Ottoman vessels in the Golden Horn. The chain is still up. They're like, what happened? You know, they found out they had gone overland. Pretty impressive if you think about it. Now at this point, Constantine and the entire imperial treasury was completely broke. So to pay the soldiers defending the city, he melts down imperial vessels. He goes into churches and he melts down the vestment to make them into coins to pay the soldiers. Now they're like, okay, there's all these ships in the Golden Horn. We need to take care of them. So a few days after the ships arrive, the Venetians and Genoans, they send out to go and attack the Turkish ships. Their plan is to burn them with Greek fire, the famous Greek fire. But unfortunately, they lost that battle. The Turks were prepared. The Turks knew they were coming. In fact, Schrances, a primary source I read, he thinks that someone snitched to the Turks because the Turks were 100% prepared for this attack. Okay, so on May 24th, the intelligence in Constantinople hears that an attack is coming for May 29th. That's when they're going to throw everything at them, land, sea, full attack. And so in the next few days, they like repair as much of the wall as they can because keep in mind, the cannons have been like this whole time for 2 months. The cannons, including the big cannon, have been just bombarding the walls constantly. And some parts of the wall aren't looking too good. So they repair what portions of the walls they can. And on May 26th, they're planning. They know the attack's coming in a couple days. So all the big guys, the Grand Duke of Constantinople, Lucas Notaras, who's very anti-Catholic, by the way, I think he's credited with the famous phrase, "I'd rather the Turkish turban than the papal mitre over my city." I believe he's credited with that. I could be wrong. But let's say he didn't say that. That was certainly how he felt. very anti-Catholic. So he gets in a fight with Justiniani because Justiniani wants the cannons on the Golden Horn walls to be brought to the gate of St. Romanus and the land walls, because that's where the brunt of the attack is going to happen. And so they almost get in a fist fight in there. And then the emperor has to kind of get them apart. He's like, guys, let's fight about this when the Turks are gone, you know? So, and that night, there's a big storm in the sky, and there's a bright light over the city. And the Turks conclude that God has abandoned the Christians. That was their interpretation of these events. Now, on May 28th, keep in mind, the attack's going to be on May 29th. And that's why we're doing this today. It's the anniversary. But on May 28th, he's preparing his troops. Now, the Sultan makes a speech to his troops. And his entire speech is all, think of the booty. Think of the money you'll get from the churches, from the palaces, from the buildings. Think of all the slaves you'll get, all the beautiful Roman women. He also was advertising the young boys available. There's going to be boys there too, because I guess there was a lot of homosexuals in the Turkish camp. But the point is, his argument is, think of the booty. Tons of booty there. Now, Constantine makes a speech as well, and he makes a very powerful speech. You can tell from this speech he's a man of faith. I won't read the speech. It's several pages long, but you can find it online. It's a powerful speech. He addresses the Romans, the Genoese, the Venetians, because in total, I guess I forgot to say this, there's about 8,000 soldiers defending the city, 5,000 Roman, 2,000 Venetian, and about 700 Genoese. And he talks to them individually. And basically, he's like, we're going to fight together, you know, and we're going to stop these guys. So at 1 a.m. on May 29th, the attack on the city starts. The first wave was the European soldiers, basically mercenaries from the Balkans. Most of these were Christians. The Sultan had Christians in his army, both Catholic and Eastern Orthodox. It's a shameful thing when you think about it. And this first wave, these people weren't the best soldiers. They weren't terrible, but they weren't the best. And they're basically there to just wear out the defenders, to use their arrows, to use their cannons, etc. And then the first wave, after a couple hours, it fails. Then they sent the Anatolian soldiers. These were like the standard soldiers, your standard Turkish soldiers of the Ottoman Empire. And they posed a larger threat. So they attacked the wall. Keep in mind, it's like a 3-4 in the morning. They attacked the wall and, again, posed a serious threat. They had to throw rocks on these people. They took cauldrons of boiling oil and boiling water and poured it down, you know, and it was pretty intense. And then eventually, after a couple hours, the Turkish regulars retreat. So they've survived 2 waves. Things are going pretty well for Constantinople. And there's only one group of Turkish soldiers left, the Janissaries. And they get their chance to go. And it's not like as soon as the Turkish soldiers pull back, the Janissaries are in. They got a 2-minute break. Because keep in mind, these Janissaries, they're the elite troops, and they're fresh as a daisy. The people on the walls have been fighting for 6-7 hours. And so the Janissaries attack. Now, there are two things that happened at the same time that were very bad. There was a gate that was left open away from the gate of St. Romanus that the Turks found, and about 50 Turks get into the city. That was bad, but that wouldn't have swayed things. Meanwhile, back at the St. Romanus gate, things are intense between the Romans and the Janissaries. And eventually, Justiniani, he gets fatally wounded by an arrow in the chest. I should point out, at this point, Francis is no longer a primary source, because Francis, although he's with the emperor the whole time, the emperor had him somewhere else in the city. So he was taken slave after the capture, and he was freed in September. This is May, September. And then he had to go and learn what happened the day of the battle, because the emperor had him somewhere else in the city. He does not say where, but point is, he's not at the battle. So it's secondhand. This is secondhand too. So, and there are some primary accounts, but they're expensive. Apparently, there's a library in my city that has a primary account. I could buy it. It's like $300. I don't want to spend that, but it's in the library. I'm going to go check it out someday. So the Janissaries are fighting the Romans, and Justiniani is fatally wounded, and he's carried off of the battlefield. And at this point, a lot of the Genoans start to retreat, probably because they were confused. They're like, where's our leader? Again, the sources are contradictory. But at this point, shortly after, the Turks managed to breach the wall, and they managed to place a flag on top of the Ottoman a tower. There's a tower on the wall, and they managed to place a flag there. And there's like paintings of this guy, like this huge janissary. He's gone up. He gets hit by like 20 arrows, and he's like, oh, and he places the flag. And like he died there, but he placed the flag there. He had done his job. Then the whole Turkish camp is like, the flag, we've got the city. So they sent their whole army to attack this portion of the wall, and they managed to breach the wall. And the emperor rallied what troops he could, cast off his cloak, threw it away, and he drew his sword with the end of his with his last soldiers he had left, and charged the Turks, and he failed. He was killed in the melee. And then at that point, the Turks had the city. They had gone into the city. They continued to take more towers, except 3 towers. Apparently, these Cretan soldiers were defending 3 of the towers, and it took forever to take these towers. And as soon as this happens, keep in mind that Turkish guy, his cousin, also a claimant of the throne, who was also defending the wall, he tried to escape because he's like, I'm finished. So he tries to escape. He's caught. He's noticed by Turkish soldiers. He's like, oh, darn. So he jumps off the wall and commits suicide. They cut off his head and bring it to the Sultan. Meanwhile, they completely sack the city. The plunder was horrible. For 3 days, they plundered, which was standard operation. And they killed all the Italians in the city, and they enslaved most of the Byzantines, except for a few wealthy families who could pay high ransoms. Now, this guy here, Critobulus, he actually compares it to the 1204 sack of Constantinople. And I'm going to read a passage from him. All right. He says after, and this is what happens with the Sultan after he comes into the city. and he sees what carnage that his soldiers have done. He says, after the Sultan entered the city and looked about to see its great size, its situation, its grandeur and beauty, its teeming population, its loveliness, and the costliness of its churches and public buildings, and of the private houses and community houses, and of those of the officials. He also saw the setting of the harbor and of the arsenals, and how skillfully and ingeniously they had everything arranged in the city. In a word, all the construction and adornment of it. When he saw what a large number had been killed, and the ruin of the buildings, and the wholesale ruin and destruction of the city, he was filled with compassion and repented not a little at the destruction and plundering. Tears fell from his eyes as he groaned deeply and passionately, what a city we have given over to plunder and destruction. So he felt bad how bad his troops had sacked it. Then there's a comparison with the 1204 sack, page 79. I'm going to he compares it with a whole bunch of sacks: capture of Jerusalem, capture of Rome, capture of Carthage, and Constantinople 1204. I'm only going to read Constantinople 1204 because we talked about that in a previous video. This hapless city was also captured by the Western peoples and tyrannized over for 60 years, and robbed of its great wealth and many very beautiful and costly statues from the churches. Yes, they had statues in churches, Greeks. The brilliant and honored and sought after masterpieces which had been seen and heard of by all were carried off to the west, while those which were left in the city became the prey to the flames. But loss and suffering were limited to that, though of course that alone was no small thing. Of the inhabitants, however, no one lost life or children or was deprived of his most valuable things. All the inhabitants were unharmed and unmolested. That's mostly true. Then having overthrown the Tyre and recovered herself, the city regained its former state and was the seat of the empire again, ruling over many, blah, 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 blah. So like basically 1204 was just take loot. This was take loot and carnage. Now where are we? So Constantine was fighting at the wall in the giant melee. And he had been killed. And I want to read, he has an elegy over the Emperor Constantine. The Emperor Constantine himself, as I said, died fighting. He was wise and moderate in his private life and diligent in the highest in prudence and virtue, sagacious as the most highly trained of men. In political affairs and in matters of government, he yielded to no one of the kings before him in preeminence. Quick to perceive his duty, and still more quick to do it, he was eloquent in speech, clever in thought, and very accomplished in talking of public affairs. He was exact in his judgments of the present, as someone has said of Pericles, and usually correct in regard to the future. A splendid worker who chose to do and to suffer everything for the fatherland and for his subjects. Therefore, when he saw with his own eyes the evident danger threatening the city and was able to save himself, he could have gone to the docks. They had proven they could run the blockade. They ran the blockade several times. But therefore, when he saw his own eyes the evident danger threatening the city and was able to save himself, he did not choose to do so, although there were many who begged him to, but preferred to die with his country and his subjects, or rather to die beforehand himself, so that he might not see his country captured and all his inhabitants either cruelly murdered or made captive and ignominiously taken away. For when he saw the enemy pressing in on him and coming through the city, through the broken wall, he is stated to have cried out this last word: "The city is taken, and it is useless for me to live any longer." So saying, he hurled himself into the midst of the enemy and was cut to pieces. He was a splendid man and the guardian of the common good, but unfortunate all through his life and doubly unfortunate at its close. All right, so he died fighting in the melee. Now, the Grand Duke of Constantinople. So, and basically, as soon as the people on the harbor walls find out they're in the city, they abandon the harbor walls and the Turks take the harbor walls because everyone is going to the docks. They need a ship to get out of the city because you're going to be taken captive. And some do escape. So they captured Lucas Notatus, the Grand Duke of Constantinople. And a few days later, they execute him. Now, it's unclear why they execute him. The sources contradict each other. Again, it's unfortunate, but it sounded, according to this source, it sounded like he was given a job in the new regime. It sounded like he had a personal interview with the Sultan, and then some people had tricked him, saying that this guy was bad, and so he executed him. But then he found out that those people were lying, and then he punished them. Yeah, I don't know. But so the point is, he's executed. But there's he goes into the city. Of course, they convert the Hagia Sophia to the mosque, and the Sultan, Mehmet the Conqueror, proclaims himself Kaiser-i-Rume, the Emperor of Rome. He's the new Roman Emperor now. And that title would stay in Ottoman titles of the Sultan. You know how kings have their titles, you know. They have like, the King of Spain has like, I don't know how many titles he had. But the point is, he now calls himself Emperor of the Romans. And that would actually stay in the list of titles until the end of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the question is, what happened to the emperor? Well, what happened to the emperor in all this? Well, of course, we know he died fighting at the wall. But so what happened was they're cleaning up the bodies. This is after the looting. And they're cleaning up the bodies. They the Turks had this practice for they would, if you're an enemy combatant, they cut off your head, throw your heads in one pile, throw the body in in the other. It's kind of gruesome, but so they're cleaning up the bodies, and they find they do notice, they find his body, because it's easy to identify the body because he's got like fancy ceremonial armor. He's got like socks on that have the Roman eagle on them and stuff like that. So they know his body, but where's the head? Some guy already cut off his head and threw it in the pile. So what happens was they go search, and they made a best guess. They're like, I think this is his head. So they take it to the Sultan. They're like, we're pretty sure that this is his head. Then there was a column close to the Hagia Sophia called the Column of Justinian, this huge column with a statue of Justinian 15 feet tall. And he had his arm extended like this. And he had a globe in his hand. And basically a warning sign to the east. It was originally used like in context of the Persians. But the Persians had not been a threat for centuries. It was the Turks who were their new threat. So they saw that as the guardian of the Turks. So to taunt the few remaining Greeks in the city, he takes the globe out of his hand, of the statue's hand, and puts Constantine's head in the hand. And then so the Turks, but this is probably the wrong head. So there's, so what happened is the Turks are walking by, and they tell the few remaining Greeks, "There's your emperor," and they're like, "That's not him." And so eventually the Sultan got furious and ordered the column taken down. Kind of a funny story there. He allowed the Greeks to bury the body of Constantine. Now, of course, as I mentioned, and as everyone knows, the Hagia Sophia had become a mosque at this point. So what happened is the Patriarchate gets moved to another church in Constantinople called the Church of the Holy Apostles. This is the famous church that the Venetian Crusaders took the famous bronze horses from. And to this day, you can see the bronze horses on display in Venice at St. Mark's Church. Anyway, they moved the Patriarchate there. But unfortunately, when the Sultan was repopulating the city, that neighborhood was like entirely Turkish. And there's this huge church in the middle of it. And the Turks didn't really like that. And neither did the Greeks. They're like, we kind of want to move. And so eventually they got the hint when a Turkish corpse turned up in the church courtyard. And then now the Turks obviously put the corpse there, but they're like, okay, we got to get out of here. So they go to the Sultan. He's like, please move us. So they get moved to the Pamukkaleistos Church, another big church in Constantinople. The Turks tear down the Church of the Holy Apostles and build a mosque there. And they build a mosque there. So and basically the Patriarch ran out of operate out of Pamukkaleistos. And then over the next few decades, the Sultan needs to rebuild a city, repopulate, because he's enslaved everyone or killed everyone. So he do forced relocations of a lot of people, including Greeks and Jews, and Turks, obviously, forced relocation to repopulate the city. It was going pretty well, but in the 60s, there was like a mini plague in Constantinople. And so that kind of slowed the progress down. And now, of course, inside the walls of Constantinople, have you ever been to Rome, Elijah?
I have, yes.
You know, in Rome, there's a church on every block, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a church on every block. And I'm presuming Constantinople was the same way at that time. But keep in mind, by the year 1600, take a guess how many churches remained inside the walls of Constantinople. Just take a guess. I'll let you guess.
20?
3. 3. Because Mehmet promised them they could keep certain churches, and that promise worked with his son Bayazid and his grandson Selim, because it's like, I got to honor my father's wish, I got to honor my grandfather's wish. But you get 4 or 5 generations down, it's like, I never met the guy, he doesn't mean anything to me, I'm taking your church. They took Pamukkaleistos from them in 1586. And by 1600, only 3 were left. They had all been converted into mosques or other Ottoman buildings. I think one of them, the Hagia Irene, was turned into an armory because they had built a palace, like a new palace for the Sultan. And this church was very close to it, and they didn't want a church close to the palace, so they just turned it into an armory for the palace guards. And so that's pretty much all I got. Is there anything else you want to know? I'm okay to take questions if you want.
Yeah, there is a question here by John. Let me pull it up for you here. Is Constantine beatified?
Now I've heard him called Saint Constantine the 11th. He's but like there are people that are called saints who aren't beatified. Like I've heard This is a biography of Aelred of Rievaulx. He's called, I've heard him called Saint Aelred, but he's not been formally canonized, and he lived after the time where they started actually doing proper canonizations as opposed to proclamation in the early church. So I've heard him referred to colloquially as saint, but I don't think he's been canonized by Catholic or the Orthodox Church. I think the people with the highest view of them are Greek Catholics, because that's technically what he was. You can debate if he was only doing that for union, but he was always friendly with the Catholic Church. He was not ever the kind of guy who would be like, I'd rather see the Sultan's turban over. He was not ever like that. And the funny thing is, his brother Thomas Paleologus stayed a Catholic till the day he died. So now in Greece, I lost a.
No, I was just trying to adjust my camera. I didn't want my hand
now
in the way. Yeah.
He's seen as kind of a national hero in Greece, and a few I've seen him called saint in Greek documents, but I don't think most people consider him a saint because he did, from an Orthodox perspective, sell out the faith. But he's still seen as a national hero in Greece. So I don't believe he's canonized or beatified.
All right. Sorry, I was on mute. Here's another question here. What did the Turks do with the Genoese and Ventanes? Did they take their colonies?
The Venetians, I'm guessing. Basically all the Italians who could not escape were killed. There's the colony north of the city, Galata. That was basically as soon as Constantinople went, they surrendered, hoping nothing would happen to them. They still looted them, but they essentially killed all the Italians and enslaved most of the Byzantines. In terms of taking their colonies, the Venetians and Genoese would still fight over islands in the Aegean with the Turks for the life. I do recommend this book, The History of Mehmed the Conqueror. It was written by a Greek in his court. He starts at his rule, so he doesn't talk about his childhood. And he talks about Constantinople. That's about a third of the book, or about 40% of the book. And then he talks about his later conquests, because he goes on other conquests after Constantinople. And so this is what you want to read. And it's not to the end of his life, because he dies in 1481. He was probably he was probably poisoned by his son. But this guy died around 1470, so he only cataloged his life up to around then. So I think it's up to like 1467. At that time, he's invading Albania, and Skanderbeg is fighting against him. Skanderbeg's a hero. I just want to say that. All right. Are there any more questions?
Yes. Yeah, we have another one here. Is it true that the help requested by the Byzantines from Rome wasn't enough to stop the Ottomans, as in the forces sent by the Pope?
Well, since the city fell, yes. Yeah, I mean, the Pope, like, at this time in 1453, Europe was a very different place than it had been 200-300 years prior. Very different. The Pope didn't have the kind of power he did, so he's like trying to beg these kings, and they're like, "Screw you, Pope! I'm going to fight my war." But to send people, and so eventually he got 200 archers, and I don't know why I call him Saint Isidore. He's not a saint, but Isidore of Kiev leads them and helps the defense. He actually helped defend portions of the wall. He had been made a cardinal at this point, so they sent him to help defend the city and also to make sure the union was being enforced. And they showed up in late 1452. All
right, and we have another question here. by Elijah, what was Isidore of Kiev's role during the fall of Constantinople?
Okay, well, I talked a bit about that in the last question. He helped defend the city. In fact, if you go to Schranzi's primary account, he gives I recorded this. He talked about who was defending where, and he was in guarded the districts. Okay, I can't find exactly where he was guarding, but he was defending a certain portion of the walls. There was about 10 commanders. Like, of course, you had the emperor, you had Justiniani, you had Lucas Notatus, but you had people like Isidore of Kiev, you had people like Orhan, the Turk, who had some Turkish defectors, some supporters of his. He defended certain parts of the wall, and there's a whole bunch of Venetian and Genoese commanders. And so, yeah, like he defended a portion of the city with the troops he had. He seems to have done as much as he could. There's no accounts of him doing a bad job or anything. So, all right, anything else?
I don't see anything else. Just waiting a few seconds here. But in the meantime, don't forget to Allan Ruhl has his own YouTube channel, as many of you already know. Don't forget to go on his YouTube channel and subscribe. He has great content on there. And as I understand it, you are going to be doing some apologetics against Islam. Is that correct?
Absolutely. No.
Yeah. So I'm excited for that. Since I come from a Muslim country, born in Iraq, and so it's a topic that's near to me, and it's a topic that I used to obsess over, but I haven't really done much research on in about over a decade. So yeah, I'm excited for that. So don't forget Allan Ruhl, Allan, Ruhl, on his YouTube. Go there and subscribe. I don't see any more questions, and I want to say thank you, Al, for being on here again. You did an excellent job as usual, and I'm excited to have you back on again as we plan our next show, which will probably be on, I think, Pope Boniface I. We don't have a date on that yet, but that's going to be the next thing that we do as a duo here. So, yeah, everyone have a wonderful night. And Al, if you want to, do you have anything to say to close?
Well, I just do want to say I do recommend this book, especially for this account of the fall of Constantinople. And of course, since he's a Greek, he mourns the loss, but he kind of fawns over Mehmet's later conquest and becomes kind of like a fanboy, kind of tries to justify that imperialism. And although this is although May 29th, 1453 was a sad day, but I know, although he may not be a canonized saint as had been asked, I don't doubt Constantine the 11th is in heaven. So a great person was gained in heaven that day. And yeah, and hopefully one day, Lord willing, that city is a Christian city once again. Pray for it.
There's someone we can pray to try to get a miracle out of and see if we can try to make him a saint. We do have one more question here. I'll take one more here. Is it fair to say that the fall of the Byzantine Empire had consequences on Orthodoxy spreading across the world?
Well, yes, it did. Because one, if you lost your most, like at that time, the population had dwindled, but it still held iconic value. And at that point, a lot of the people in the Orthodox world outside of Constantinople had been living under Turkish domination. Like at this point, there's a lot of Greeks in Anatolia, and they had been living under Turkish domination for a long time. And they're like, well, as long as Constantinople's there and the emperor's there and the patriarch's there, one day hopefully they'll come and free us from the Turks, and it didn't happen. And yeah, it's and at that point they start talking about Moscow as Third Rome. They're like, well, Constantinople apostatized. Like the first Rome has gone apostate. The second Rome joined first Rome in apostasy and fell to the Turks. And then the third Rome is Moscow. So we're the leaders of the Christian faith there. So you start to get a lot of Third Rome language amongst Eastern Orthodox people.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of Romes out there.
Yeah. I like me, I'm from Calgary in Canada. I think we're 6th or 7th Rome. I'm starting to lose count. But there's a question by John Colarafi here.
Yeah, I was going to ask this one next. What are the main primary accounts?
This is not a primary account. It's an account. He comes basically after the city's been taken. This guy's from an island in the Aegean. And and he basically talks to everyone and finds out what happened. So it's not primary, but pretty good. And he's a primary source for other stuff. Francis is a primary account, but remember the day of the battle, Francis was somewhere else in the city. So what happened May 29th, he had to learn about later. Now, there's a Venetian guy. His name is Niccolo Bardaro, and that is available in English. It's a primary account. Unfortunately, it's expensive. If you go on Books or Amazon, it's expensive. You'll have to pay $300-$400. There's a library in my city who has it, but he gives a day-by-day account of the siege, primary source. But of course, it's not super reliable in some respects because he's Venetian, so he's very anti-Genoese. And so he's always saying bad things about them, because of national rivalry and stuff. But still, it's a good source. Then there's another Greek source that's available on Amazon. It's 2 parts, and it's about $40 each. This is $40 Canadian. I don't know how much that is in American. And I don't know the name offhand. It's a long Greek name. I can't remember it. And I think there's maybe 1 or 2 more primary sources. I don't know of any Turkish sources about this. Presumably they exist, but I'm not aware of any. I've tried to find it. I mean, I hope that helps. If you want, John, you can always send me an email, and it's alruhl25@gmail.com, and send me an email there. And so there's quite a few primary sources. But of course, since it's a battle, it's kind of like what happened, because it's kind of hard to record what happened in a battle, because everything's happening so quickly, and a few days later you're like, wait, did this happen first, or did that, But so John, I hope that helps.
Thank you for that question, John, and thank you, Al, for answering all the questions and doing the show here with us. I want to thank everyone for listening, for tuning in. Please don't forget to like, share this, and subscribe, and please comment under the YouTube channel here once we go off air. If you have any additional questions, I'm sure Al will see that and he can answer your questions on there. Other than that, everyone have a good night, and God bless, and have a great weekend.